Everyone thinks I'm a human version of a bulldog. I'm pretty direct, and when I latch onto something, they compare it to a bulldog with its grip on a bone. I don't let go, and I don't give up. I follow every action to its logical end. Many think I'm the luckiest person in the world, but all I really am is prepared. In everything I do, I make sure I'm as ready as possible to achieve a positive outcome for myself. I'm more of a wolf than a bulldog combined because I examine things from every angle I can think of to identify any weaknesses in the business or person. Never underestimate the value of research, personally or professionally. I explore every avenue available to me before deciding on a plan of action. It's one of the many reasons I have a successful business. If I have a new vendor or customer, I find out all there is about them and don't take anything at face value. They may look good on paper, but if I dig deeper, I might discover issues like a recent messy divorce affecting their company, or maybe they declared bankruptcy years ago. Some might be involved in personal matters that aren't particularly discreet or associate with questionable characters who could negatively impact their business, and in turn mine. I'm a bit like a venture capitalist, though some might call it a legal form of a moneylender if they wanted to be unkind. I've accumulated some money over my life and managed to grow it substantially by investing wisely with people I have a high degree of confidence in. I'm not infallible. Some investments don't work out, but my success ratio is about 80%, so I can absorb a loss and move on. Often, it's a learning experience that gives me better insight into future deals. Widely diversified, I have a stake in many things. I had a friend who was an excellent trainer with degrees in physical therapy and sports medicine. She was very good at what she did, but had no business sense. When she approached me about starting her own business, I researched it with my usual thoroughness and guided her through the process. She learned a great deal in a short time about how her industry worked, and in the end, we agreed it was a viable opportunity. I started with 60% ownership, but wasn't actively involved except for business matters. There was a standard buyout clause in every contract allowing the minority owner to buy me out over a 5 to 10 year term. There's also a clause that if the business starts failing, I step in to analyze the data and decide whether to take over management or shut it down. I've had to do that 3 times, and I took it as a personal challenge each time. I had invested in an advertising agency early on, which became very successful. They were approached by some major players wanting to buy them out and have them work for their organization. Bob and Jen called me for help, and we reviewed the offer. It was attractive, but I showed them that as their reputation grew, they could become bigger than the company trying to buy them out in 15 years. They declined the offer, and over the years, it has been very profitable for me. I still own 20% through the structured buyout program we agreed to, and in 4 years, they'll be completely independent. My usual practice is to involve those I've worked with before to help make my newer investments successful. Bob crafted a campaign for Jody's rehabilitation clinic, and within 2 years, she franchised and now has offices in every southern state and parts of the Midwest. I own a small stake in each one because she insisted it made her feel more secure. The person who started me on this path was an old-time wheeler dealer who liked to fly under the radar. Over his lifetime, he probably paid about 20% of the taxes he owed and managed to avoid consequences. I wasn't quite that bold. My deals were straightforward and transparent. With the advent of computers, it became harder to evade the tax authorities, which is why Great Uncle Harry avoided technology. There had been a scandal at an accounting firm in my town where no one was overseeing them, and they had exploited the situation to the tune of $12 million. They were caught, the owners went to jail, and the money was never recovered. It piqued my interest, so I bought the business at a bargain price. The old owners were desperate to pay their lawyers, so they didn't profit from the sale. I kept 3 junior accountants who weren't involved and built the business slowly. Their core business involved ensuring that the companies I invested in adhered to ethical practices and providing expert advice when needed, usually from me. I had renamed the company, and my team managed to regain about 25% of their previous customers, leading to a noticeable increase in revenue. I offered the 3 original accountants a buyout deal at 6% a year for 10 years, which they eagerly accepted. By then, I was 32 and content with most aspects of my life. But I felt lonely. I dated frequently, but hadn't yet found the one. Harry's wife had become fed up with his numerous affairs, and significantly impacted him during their divorce. She knew more about his business than he realized, and once she was done, the IRS came knocking. The only thing that kept him from jail was my assistance. It was close, but he had to pay an estimated $214,000 in penalties and taxes. I loaned him the money to cover this, which put me under scrutiny, but my transparent practices paid off. Harry repaid me at a pre-agreed rate from his salary as one of my warehouse managers, plus additional amounts informally. By the end of his probation, he would be free of debt. This experience made me value transparency and openness. If I ever found a woman I loved enough to marry, a prenuptial agreement would be a given, with stringent penalties for infidelity from either spouse. I discussed this with my lawyer, who provided the framework for the details to be worked out when the time came. Being an only child of parents with minimal family ties, I was quite alone in the world, which made me long for a large family. I wanted at least 3 children, and would consider it a bonus if one came with a mother. I was young, not unattractive, and had enough money to make dating attractive. I had 2 serious relationships, but one ended when she couldn't accept the prenup. Despite our feelings, she turned bitter, and we drifted apart. 6 months later, she married a businessman from old money, but ended up in divorce court within 6 months, attempting to extract as much as she could. She partially succeeded but couldn't access the family money locked in a trust. The businessman almost lost his company until I stepped in. 3 years later, he's worth more than before, engaged to a lovely woman with a child from a previous marriage, and they were house shopping. I set up their real estate arrangements through one of my interests. At the same time, his ex-wife had married and divorced twice more, getting little from each marriage. I encountered her at lunch one day, and she blamed me for her problems. I just smiled and responded, "I'm not the cause of all your problems, just the big ones. The rest is on you." I had become frustrated with finding love, so I took a step back. Then, unexpectedly, I ran into someone at the advertising agency. I was a tall guy, and she was quite petite. Later, I learned she was 5 feet tall and weighed 90 pounds. After helping her up and admiring her, I introduced myself. She initially had a sharp retort, but then noticed my friendly demeanor and relaxed. We chatted, and she mentioned my good physical shape, which I attributed to the regimen I followed, thanks to Jody, who mapped out my meals and exercise routine. I also had a fondness for craft brews, though many were disappointing because some brewers mistakenly thought higher alcohol content meant better beer. I financed the startup of my favorite brewer after sampling his homemade creations. He was initially hesitant, but was guided through the process with my support. His finances were managed by accountants, and a viral campaign, along with local and state magazine ads, helped boost his brand. Despite high demand and restrictive regulations, his product stood out. I was part of his focus group, and he valued my opinion. I grinned at her slightly. I wouldn't classify myself as stone. She absently rubbed her bottom, making the term seem more literal. "As interesting as it is to meet you, I have to go back to work," I said. We parted ways, and I wondered what she did there. Jan told me she was a new associate, fresh from college with a master's degree and a lot of enthusiasm. I saw her a few more times when I had to visit the office. When we exchanged names, it was hard not to laugh. My name was Roy McCoy, and hers was Jimmy Cho. No relation, she assured me. We had coffee twice, and then went on a few lunches before having a proper date. At the fancy restaurant I took her to, we got a few curious looks. I was over 6 feet tall and solidly built, thanks to working out, while she was a petite oriental beauty, over a foot shorter. Jimmy was half Korean and half Japanese, inheriting the best traits of both, in my opinion. She shared that there had been historical tensions between Koreans and Japanese due to past atrocities, which led her parents to move to North America. She had been raised mostly in Canada and had moved there only 4 years ago. Her Canadian accent was still evident when she spoke, which I found endearing. I told her about my background, born and raised locally, a year of community college before dropping out, and then using an inheritance from a great-grandmother I never knew to start my business. She seemed impressed. "Wow, you must be really smart," she said. I grinned. "Not really. I just got good advice from a successful man. He said you didn't have to be the smartest person in the room, just smart enough to recognize who was and use their intelligence. Most geniuses aren't very business savvy, which is where I come in." I reflected on my failures, mentioning how I considered each one a learning experience. Jimmy laughed at some of my stories about these failures, and I found her reaction quite charming. "You really thought that was a good idea?" she asked. "Not then, but at the time it seemed sensible." After the meal, I took her to a performance by a local amateur theater group. They were putting on the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the audience's interactions made things lively. When the scene came where Dr. Frankenfurter asked Brad if he had tattoos, a member of the audience shouted, "A-holes don't have tattoos." The actor playing Dr. Frankenfurter grinned and replied, "Mine does." Jimmy lost it, laughing so hard she gave herself hiccups. At the meet and greet after the show, I talked to everyone while Jimmy mingled with the actors. One of the actresses, Celeste, still in her costume, engaged in conversation with Jimmy. Celeste joked about enjoying showing off her figure and shared that she and her husband, Jack, were adventurous and not averse to discreet partners. I noticed Jack looking at me with interest, and Celeste had a similar gleam in her eye. I left shortly after, and as I reached the door, Celeste's bra flew past me. I didn't turn around. I took Jimmy home, and she asked me to wait in the hall for a moment. When she called me in, she was standing on a step stool in a robe. As soon as I closed the door, she dropped the robe, revealing the white bra and hat slip. "Touch me. I want to be close." She motioned me closer. We shared a prolonged goodnight kiss, filled with light touches. Finally, she gently pushed me away. "That's a really good start. It's too soon to go farther, but time will take care of that if you continue to ask me out." Later, I discovered that when we were together, we were exactly the same height. I tried to be gentle due to her size, but she encouraged me to be more adventurous. She was happy as she lay on top of me, and we fell asleep almost immediately afterward. 3 months later, she moved in with me. 6 months after that, she was wearing my ring. It was her birthday, and I gave her the first of her gifts, a pair of Jimmy Choo heels with a 4-inch heel. Jimmy grinned and teased me that I'd wasted my money but tried them on anyway. "Ouch, there's something in the toe of this one," she said, shaking it, and a ring fell out. She stared at it for a few seconds, then looked at me. By then, I was on one knee. She was surprisingly strong for her size, knocking me over when she leaped into my arms. By the time we managed to get off the floor, she had the ring on her finger. We married the following June with the right amount of pomp and circumstance in front of friends and family. For our honeymoon, we went somewhere warm and mostly clothes optional, and settled into domestic bliss. I was truly happy. Jimmy loved her job, which she was very good at, and I continued to manage my usual way. I invested heavily in a security firm when its principal owner mishandled a personal issue, leading to significant legal trouble and a hefty discount on the business. The owner had been a guest of the state for 5 years due to his actions, and I took over the firm, hiring a retired Army inspector to run it. Surprisingly, there was little actual detective work. It was mostly digital, handled by a team of skilled tech experts. The firm focused on corporate work, including a thorough review of the businesses I was involved with. Jimmy wasn't thrilled when I presented the prenuptial agreement. We nearly didn't marry over it, but my lawyer and hers reached a compromise. I put $250,000 in a trust, adding 5% a year if the marriage ended due to my infidelity. If Jimmy was caught cheating, she would walk away with nothing but what we had accrued together. It felt more like a business transaction than a marriage. But I believed neither of us would ever cheat, so it seemed like just words on paper that we would eventually forget. For years into our marriage, I thought everything was going well. We were both fit, active people with a good circle of friends. I got into whitewater kayaking, which Jimmy tried a few times before deciding it wasn't for her. She urged me to be careful. My cousin warned me about pushing limits in dangerous rapids, advising against going alone. He didn't want to be the one to tell Jimmy that I died doing something risky. Jimmy became involved with the local theater guild. We got season passes and often brought friends along. 3 of the companies I was involved with were patrons, and I helped with set construction, while Jimmy contributed by painting and sanding. One night, just hours before a new production's opening, one of the actresses had an accident and ended up in the hospital with a broken leg. The director was panicking when he noticed Jimmy. She was nervous at first, but by the end of the final performance, she was hooked. She received praise for her natural talent and quickly moved into second lead roles. Despite the time commitment, she loved it, so I didn't complain much. I eventually expressed how much I missed our time together, and Jimmy agreed to cut back, skipping every 3rd production. She bonded with many of the actors who became frequent guests in our home. Celeste and Jack, in particular, became good friends. Although there was flirting and innuendo when we were alone, they respected our boundaries. One day, Jimmy and I discussed Jack. I had a conversation with Jimmy about Jack and Celeste's swinging lifestyle to clarify my stance on infidelity. I told her, if you want to play around, that's fine, but be prepared for the consequences. Once it's done, there's no coming back. Jimmy seemed to come out of a daze and replied, "Of course, honey, I understand." Although she agreed, I could see a hint of disappointment in her eyes. A few weeks later, Jimmy came home from a theater guild meeting looking starry-eyed. "I got the lead," she exclaimed. I was thrilled for her and gave her a big hug and kiss. "You'll be amazing. Celeste better watch out," I teased. She giggled and said, "Jack and Phil are taking care of that." "Good for them," I said, but I couldn't help but think they might push it too far one day. It could end badly if one of them does something unforgivable. Jimmy mentioned that they were totally in love and that their unconventional lifestyle seemed to keep things exciting in their relationship. I grinned at her enthusiasm and asked, "Not reconsidering monogamy, are you?" She blushed and smiled. "Never. I like what we have just fine. In fact, why don't we head to the bedroom so I can remind you just how much I appreciate it?" The bedroom felt too far away, so I didn't wait and was on her before she could react. The next day, I made it up to her with a trip to a high-end lingerie shop. The store, a long-standing establishment with a selection far surpassing national chains, was a lot of fun. I almost laughed when the grandmotherly saleswoman gave Jimmy a tour of the fetish room, clearly excited about showing her the unique items. Jimmy picked out a chainmail bra that looked stunning on her. She said she wanted something that was impossible to tear. Our relationship was thriving, and we even started discussing having children. Jimmy, who had no siblings, wavered between wanting 3 children one day and none the next. I was on board with whatever number she chose. Meanwhile, I was working on a new project. Our favorite restaurant had gone out of business due to poor management, and the chef approached me with a proposal. We bought the defunct restaurant, remodeled it, and hired a top-notch staff. I had previously invested in a restaurant that failed after a year due to poor management. But this time, the chef's reputation and our thorough vetting gave me confidence. I held a 60% stake, and the chef put up a little cash in his reputation for the remaining 40%. The renovation exceeded our expectations and came in under budget. Jimmy put together an excellent ad campaign, and our opening night was a success with the restaurant at full capacity. We selected diners randomly through an online lottery for a free meal and reserved a few tables for food critics and writers. The reviews were fantastic. Jack and Celeste were our guests, and they brought their friend Philip along. Philip was a bit full of himself, with a few local commercials and minor roles in films, but he seemed harmless and even somewhat amusing. His date, Cynthia, was one of the board members and main directors. She was about 10 years older than Philip and clearly infatuated with him, although she was also very married to a man with a reputation for being unforgiving. I wondered if her husband knew where she was. I was relieved when Celeste asked if I would join them, given that Jimmy was away for a week and wouldn't be back for another 4 days. I was feeling restless. It was so good to get out with friends. Jimmy was selling something that felt insincere to me, but I kept a neutral demeanor. It wasn't my problem, but if what I suspected was true, and Jim ever found out, Philip wouldn't be auditioning for leading man roles anymore. His facial modifications would land him in the quirky sidekick zone, and he deserved every bit of trouble coming his way. Celeste noticed my thoughts and grinned, knowing what was on my mind. We had become good friends, even better than Jack and I, and she lived her life by her own standards, which gave me no reason to judge. The food was excellent, and the conversation was stellar, except for Philip's contributions. Celeste would deliberately say things he couldn't understand and then smile as he floundered. It was mean but amusing. If looks could kill, Cynthia would have had Celeste on the ground. It oddly seemed to upset Jimmy, though she tried hard not to show it. I wondered how long it took Philip to remember his lines after such a decadent dessert and rich coffee. Jack and Philip suggested we go to a club to work off some calories. I can't, I said. I have to stay and network. Remember, Gene would have a fit if I threw him to the wolves. He can cook, but he's not great with networking. We're working on it. Celeste said, I have to stay too. I need to interview the chef, get patron reactions, and photograph some dishes in diners. I wanted to do it tonight, but I wanted to enjoy the meal from a customer's viewpoint. Do you mind if we go ahead? You guys can catch up with us later. Celeste frowned at Jack, while Philip grinned. Jimmy chimed in, would you mind? This way, I can get all the fast ones out of the way. When you get there, we can just grind on each other until we can't take it anymore. We watched them leave, and Celeste turned to me, placing a hand on my arm. It'll be fine, Roy. Nothing will happen. I grinned and asked, who are you trying to reassure, honey? Me or you? She sighed and said, Jack's been pushing the envelope lately. I thought we were in tune, but now I'm starting to worry. Celeste, I said, if it bothers you, address it openly. You're a fine woman, and Jack is a fool if he jeopardizes your relationship. You could replace him easily, but he'll never find anyone like you again. Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged me tightly. If it all falls apart, and I'm a free agent, I'll be watching Jimmy closely, waiting for her to mess up. It'll never happen. But if it does, I'll be all over you and Roy. It would be just you for as long as you'd have me. I kissed her cheek and told her she would be the first I'd turn to if things went awry. We finished our tasks and met up with Jack and Philip, who looked like they'd run a marathon. At the club, Jimmy and Cynthia were still on the floor, dancing with abandon. I was amazed because I'd never seen Jimmy like that. She twirled, saw me, and let out a happy squeal, almost knocking me over as she jumped into my arms and gave me a passionate kiss. Come on, she said. A slow song began, and she pressed close to me, making the most of our height difference. She looked into my eyes the whole time. By the end of the song, she was subtly grinding against me. I was afraid to look down, fearing she had left a wet spot. She sat down while the others danced, holding my hand until Celeste approached. Give him up, honey, Celeste said. If he wants a good review, he's going to have to dance with the blogger. Jimmy giggled and pushed me toward her. We danced for a minute until the music changed and a slow song played. Celeste snuggled into me, resting her head on my shoulder. A few minutes later, she lifted her head with a frown. Jack had Jimmy on the floor and was all over her, and she didn't seem to be resisting much. Celeste pulled us over to Jimmy and pushed her into my arms. "Don't be a fool, honey. Dance with your husband." Celeste grabbed Jack, and they didn't look like a happy couple. We left after the song ended. Celeste and Jack seemed to be arguing while Cynthia appeared to be trying to get Philip's attention on the dance floor. Jimmy was quiet on the way home and was asleep when I parked the car. I debated leaving her in the car, but love overcame my frustration, so I picked her up gently and put her to bed like a child. I was too keyed up to sleep, so I watched Curiosity stream until I dozed off in my recliner. I woke up at 6:30 and knew I wouldn't go back to sleep. I made coffee and took a shower. 2 hours later, Jimmy crept into the kitchen and grabbed a cup. We sat together for a while before she asked timidly, "Did I do anything stupid last night?" I replied, "Define stupid. Let me rephrase that. Did I do anything that could cause trouble in our relationship?" I frowned while organizing my reaction. "Not really, but you were close enough to the line that the smallest nudge could have pushed you over it. It was more than borderline inappropriate action, at least once. If you want out of the marriage, tell me now, because I won't last much longer if you continue." Her reaction surprised me. She went pale and vomited on the kitchen table, moaning repeatedly. I cleaned up, put Jimmy in the shower, cleaned us both, and put her back to bed. She didn't get up until 5 in the afternoon. When she found me dressed in a suit, she was surprised. "I have to go back to the restaurant. Remember, Celeste is coming over to finish her pictures for her blog post. You were supposed to go with me, but I don't think you're up to it. I should be back by 8 at the latest." I didn't give her a chance to argue, walking by her and leaving. Gene was nervous as this was his official opening. Yesterday had been by invitation only and the menu had been limited. This time, he featured a full menu and had been booked solid by 10 that morning. The kitchen was a madhouse, so I stayed out of the way as Celeste followed chefs, waiters, and prep workers around. After an hour, she was back at my table, sighing as she sat down. "You still have your touch, honey. This place is going to be another gold mine for you." I relaxed as I sipped my coffee. The machine, insisted upon by our resident barista, was worth its weight in gold. I hope so. This is just the first step. Next year, we'll be opening 2 new venues, one in Atlanta and another in Jacksonville. If those work out, we'll be nationwide and in Canada in 3 years. The ad guys are working on the tie-ins, cookbooks, personal appearances, television exposure, the whole enchilada. Jean may have to give up chef status before too much longer. Her eyes widened before she smiled. "You always play the long game, don't you? Your choices and investments always seemed random to me. It took a couple of years before I saw the method to your madness. How many facilities does JAR Enterprises have now?" 19 and 2 more on tap before the end of the year, and I own a chunk of all of them. I couldn't help grinning. Yep, very small, but very profitable chunks. Got anything else up your sleeve? I'm looking. Had a couple more opportunities, things I don't want to discuss until they're a done deal. Her grin was wider. I'm sure I'll read about it in the paper. Then she changed gears. Want to talk about last night a little? I haven't talked to Jimmy yet. What makes me wonder is if we'd been an hour later, what would we have found? Celeste took my hand. Don't rush into judgment. You know Jimmy loves you. I think she just had a bit too much to drink, and it clouded her judgment. Besides, you saw how happy she was when we showed up. I had to admit she was right, but I didn't think it completely absolved Jimmy. I took my last sip of coffee. I'm going home now. We'll see what she says. Jimmy was all over me when I got home, with apologies coming fast and furious. I finally got her to calm down. I know you were drunk. That doesn't bother me that much. What does bother me is that you got drunk in the company of 2 men who were not reliable. Philip was all over a married woman, and Jack is someone who would see you being drunk as an opportunity. I want your word that there will be no repeat of this situation. Do you understand? She swore on the lives of our unborn children, that it would never happen again. We went to bed, and when she reached out to me, I gently turned her down. "You're still not 100%, honey. I don't want to make up for something that you're really not into. We'll play tomorrow." She sighed and snuggled into me. "Promise. Promise." We did spend time together the next night, and Jimmy put every ounce of love she had into it. For the next few months, when we went out, she limited her alcohol intake quite a bit. The only time she would get the slightest bit tipsy was when it was just us, and she knew I'd take care of her. Jimmy was a dynamo under normal circumstances, but after a bit of alcohol, she took it to a whole new level. I suspect that had quite a bit to do with her actions that night, and she agreed, promising it would never happen again. There's a lot of effort that goes into staging a live play, endless rehearsals, costume fittings if the production is a period or fantasy piece, mild rewrites to adjust to the play's potential, sound checks, lighting adjustments, blocking of positions on stage that the audience cannot see, staging props, and prepping backdrops. In a short period, the guild stayed busy until showtime. I was extremely busy with a few projects, so I had no time to volunteer. They all made me promise on pain of death to be at the opening, so I rearranged my schedule. Jimmy grinned like mad when I showed her the t-shirt I had made to wear to the premiere. It had a picture of her looking stunning, and the logo read, "I'm married to a thespian." I walked into the auditorium to be greeted by a very nervous-looking Celeste. She wasn't involved in the play. Her blog had taken off, and she was spending a lot of time on it. Sponsorship had picked up, especially from the food industry, and she had started doing remotes from organic farms, large meat processing plants, small dairies, and then following the food from farm and plant to the consumers, including grocery stores, farmers markets, and restaurants. My team helped her out, and she was now in the planning stages of a show we were going to pitch to Food Network and PBS. One of my new projects was a video studio Celeste had introduced me to. I toured the facility, meeting with the management team. They were transparent about their needs. "We're doing really well and need to expand. Unfortunately, we've reached our credit limit, and the banks don't want to fund the expansion. We can make great videos and short films, but we have only minimal business experience. Celeste thinks we could be very beneficial to each other." I did my due diligence and liked what I saw. The two owners were pouring every dime of their personal money into a short animated film that showed a great deal of promise. Sadly, they were turning away business because they didn't have the capabilities. In the end, I bought a 60% stake in their business, paying off existing loans and getting them the funding they needed to expand. I explained the buyout clause I always offered, and they surprised me by asking me to wait 2 years before we discussed it again. That would give us time to look for someone to handle the business side. In the meantime, they thought I would do quite well. The business was fascinating. If Celeste got her show, I was going to be the executive producer, even if I wasn't entirely sure what that entailed. I grinned as I kissed her cheek. She was under a lot of stress trying to launch her show, and she and Jack weren't getting along well. "It's like he doesn't even miss me," she said. "We haven't spent much time together, let alone with anyone else. It's like he could care less if I'm around." Alarm bells went off. Jack was known for his wandering eye. If he wasn't getting attention at home, he might seek it elsewhere. I commiserated with her. Jimmy and I aren't getting the quality time we need either. I'm gone a lot, and she's either working or tied up in rehearsals. I'm going to ask her to take a break and concentrate on us for a while. I'm almost done traveling, and I'd like to revisit the conversation about having children. I'm 36 and want to be able to chase them around when they come. Celeste smiled sadly. Early on, she and Jack had decided not to have children. Jack had undergone a vasectomy and wanted Celeste to have her tubes tied, but she resisted. "Great news," I said, hoping to cheer her up. PBS and Home and Garden Network are interested. Plus, the Food Network called and wants a meeting with us. "Looks like you're going to be a star." She smiled but wasn't as happy as I expected. I didn't get to explain that Home and Garden wanted a separate show focusing on farms and the food industry, while PBS leaned more towards restaurants. She might end up doing 2 shows with some crossover material. Look, Roy, I need to prepare you. The show is about adultery, and originally included a bedroom scene about the cheaters' first time in bed together. I fought to have it cut and thought I was successful until Cynthia told me she put it back in just now. Please remember it's just a play, and everyone is pretending. The way she said it made me realize this wouldn't be a pleasant experience. I was more than correct. The production was well written. You could follow the angst and weakening wills. There were a few scenes where the man and woman were on opposite sides of a darkened stage, texting while messages flashed on a screen behind them. Then came the secret meetings, the touches, and the increased passion of their interactions. The lead male, Philip, played well off Jimmy, and I had to wonder how hard it was for him, as it seemed to flow naturally. The final scene depicted them consummating their relationship in a modest motel room. The stage was set with a king-sized bed in the middle of the room. Philip, in his arrogance, wore minimal clothing. Jimmy walked on stage in a sheer red nightgown that barely reached her waist. The lights went out as they reached for each other. If they were expecting a huge round of applause, they were mistaken. There had been a few gasps and then silence before a few tentative patrons applauded. Celeste had locked onto my hand and refused to let go. When the lights came up, people who knew me had a hard time looking at me. Jimmy didn't even put on a robe as they took their bows, and her attire left little to the imagination. I was beyond furious. I looked at Celeste. "You can let me go now." She held on tighter. "Calm down, please, Roy. It was just a play. It doesn't mean anything. Did you see the same things I did? Let me go, Celeste." She tried to hold on, but I gently reached down and grabbed her little finger, bending it backwards until she had to either let go or risk injuring herself. She finally let go with a gasp, and I turned and headed for the reception area where the performers mingled with the patrons. Jimmy was between Philip and Jack, still in her gown and smiling widely. The women were either avoiding looking at her or casting barely concealed contempt, while the men were just staring. Jack had directed the play, and they were basking in accolades. When I stood in front of them, Jimmy's smile faded as she saw the look on my face. "Get some clothes on," I said. She ran backstage, leaving Philip and Jack. They were both smirking, and Philip said, "Your wife is something else." Before Philip could say more, my fist connected with his jaw. I was extremely angry and fairly strong, thanks to my training, and I knocked him out cold. Jack tried to run, but I grabbed him by his long hair and dragged him back. "You thought I'd just stand by for this?" Jack's smirk returned. "I don't care what you stand for." Jimmy was all for it, especially the extra rehearsal time we put in to make it convincing. She joined Philip on the floor. Everyone was standing around horrified, and I turned to 2 members of the board of directors. "You approve this? Screw all of you. You'll get a letter Monday notifying you that I'm withdrawing my patronage and that of any companies I'm involved with." That shocked them. Between my personal patronage and my companies, it amounted to about 40% of their budget. They would have to scramble to secure new patrons or risk the season being jeopardized. They tried to do damage control, claiming the rehearsal didn't include the bedroom scene. Cynthia stormed up, screaming that it was just a play and none of it was real. Just a pretend version of my wife involved in intimate scenes. That makes everything all right. Just because you act out doesn't mean everyone around you has to accept it. Stick those tired excuses back in your dress. They don't impress anyone. She went pale. Her outfit, which left little to the imagination, was clearly supported by a good bra. The most shocking part was the look of horror on her husband's face. Celeste came up, gently reaching out. "Roy, please calm down." I shook her hand away. "I thought you were my friend. You could have warned me, given me a chance to stop this mess. But you didn't." Celeste's face showed horror as I almost outed their private lifestyle. "Sorry, that's all I can say. Before I could say more, a large woman tackled me to the ground. She was easily over 6 feet tall and weighed about 250 pounds. She didn't hit like a girl. Philip's wife was not someone to underestimate. By then, the police had arrived, and both of us ended up in handcuffs. The EMTs were tending to Philip and Jack. Jack had a fat lip, but Philip had a hairline jaw fracture and wouldn't be getting speaking roles for a while. It took an hour to sort everything out. I was cooperative with the police, and since Philip was an outsider, I received the benefit of the doubt. His wife agreed to drop the charges if I let her attack on me go. Celeste had left, supporting Jack as tears rolled down her cheeks. She was the only one I felt sorry for in the whole mess. Jimmy first appeared in a robe, took in the scene, and then scurried away. Coming back later in jeans and a t-shirt, her makeup was a mess. I looked her dead in the eyes as soon as the handcuffs were off, yanking my shirt off and throwing it to the ground before she ran out of the hall, crying. I didn't see her until the next day. I looked rather odd walking into Walmart in just a suit jacket and jeans, but it was late at night, and it's Walmart. I'm sure they've seen worse. I grabbed a couple of shirts, jeans, underwear, and socks. I had no intention of going home, so I crashed at a motel in the next town over. My phone had been ringing constantly, so I put it on silent and didn't check it until mid-morning the next day. There were 30 calls from Jimmy, 5 from different board members, 1 from Philip's wife, and 2 from Celeste. I listened to a few from Jimmy. They were what I expected. It was just a play, nothing had happened, and I was blowing it out of proportion. I needed to come home so she could explain. I listened closely but never heard an apology for what she had done. I stopped after 8 and deleted the rest. The board members all echoed the same sentiment. It was just a play. They had no idea the bedroom scene had been reinserted. Jack and Philip were banned from the rest of the season, and Cynthia had been asked to resign. It seemed they were trying to make things right, so I might give them the benefit of the doubt. The message from Philip's wife was interesting. I don't know who needs to apologize here. You shouldn't have hit him so hard, and I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. I don't think anything happened, but if it did and you have proof, I'd ask that you share it. I agree the bedroom scene was in poor taste, but I think Jack and my husband feed off each other, and your wife got caught in the middle. That won't be a problem in the future. I've told him in no uncertain terms that he's done with the guild, and if he can't generate decent income from acting within the next 6 months, he'll have to get a real job. At least one person had some integrity. I called back and had a lengthy conversation. We didn't part as friends, but we weren't sworn enemies either. It was more difficult talking to Celeste when she answered. I started speaking so she wouldn't have a chance to interrupt. Look, I'm sorry about last night. I was pretty upset and may have overreacted. Your lifestyle is your business as long as it doesn't affect mine. I like you a lot, but you have some decisions to make. Decisions I don't think will include Jack in the long run. If I see him again anytime soon, he might end up with another injury. I'd prefer you not cut me out of your life, but if you have to, I'll understand. When I finished, there was silence. Then she started talking. You've hurt me, Roy. In all the time I've known you, you've never said anything directly negative about my lifestyle. Jack can be a difficult person and sometimes goes too far. He should have never put that scene back in. I suspect he did it just to upset you. He feels threatened by you. You're smarter, more successful, and you have more to offer. He's convinced that you and I are involved because we're together so much, and he's worried that one day you'll come on to me. I couldn't help laughing. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm not that large. Jack isn't that small. And if we ever got together, I'd make sure it was meaningful and respectful. If we continued, I imagine it would be something special. I could almost feel her blush. I have to go now. Call me later if you want to discuss the show options. At least one bridge was mended. Jimmy was a different story. I called her and didn't give her a chance to speak. Be at the house by 6 o'clock. You better have your head on straight and not lie. If I find out you are unfaithful, that's it. I'll show no mercy." When I arrived, I was relieved to see she wasn't drinking. We both needed a clear head to get through this. "Honey, I'd like to speak first and ask some questions if you don't mind." Knowing how organized she was, I suspected she had a plan for how to present things. I threw out the script and asked, "Who picked the play you were presenting?" "Jack did." "When you read it, especially the bedroom scene at the end, did you feel it was appropriate for a small-town audience?" She was a bit flustered. Jack said it would be good for the town to challenge them and broaden their horizons. "And you agreed?" "Not at first, but Jack and Philip convinced me it was the right thing." "Can I say something?" "Yes. It was incredibly stupid and inexcusable. The Guild has received a lot of negative feedback since that night. 17 season ticket holders have demanded refunds, and 2 corporate sponsors have canceled their support. This could be the end of local theater." I was having a hard time feeling much empathy for them. "Please, Roy, you don't have to forgive Jack or Philip or even me, but you love that theater. Think carefully before you destroy it. They might never recover." She was right. But at the time, I didn't care. "Did you get involved with them?" "No, not at all." "Did you think about it? Did your rehearsals ever get a bit out of hand? Look me in the eye and tell me nothing inappropriate happened. Most of all, explain why you thought it would be acceptable to perform in minimal attire and then do the curtain call without dressing." There was a lot of sobbing. Instead of comforting her, I waited until she composed herself. Jack didn't tell me until just before the curtain went up that the scene was back in. Jack and Philip gave me the costume and assured me that the lights would be dimmed before I went on stage. But Jack just pushed me onto the stage, leaving me with no choice but to perform. I understand that the show must go on, but when Jack told you the bedroom scene was back in, why didn't you refuse to do it? When Jack pressured you, you could have stepped back. I think you were excited and chose to go along with it, even though you knew it would embarrass and upset me. If you had put on a robe for the curtain call, I might have overlooked it, but you didn't. You walked out there in minimal attire, making it clear to everyone in town what you looked like. I was exhausted and decided we were done talking. Jimmy's reaction was intense. She screamed and threw herself at me, pleading and crying. I held her until she passed out, feeling her snuggle deeper into my arms. Did I still love her? Yes. Did I think I could get over what she did? Maybe. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of coffee. She came to the table wearing one of my old t-shirts, her black hair a tousled mess. To me, she had never looked prettier. She talked for half the morning, revealing many things. She admitted to being scared of having children and jealous of Celeste. Jack had exploited that jealousy, telling her it was fine if I slept with his wife, and that he'd be happy to reciprocate. Philip had also encouraged her by praising her attractiveness and suggesting she deserved better. She swore nothing had happened between them, but admitted there had been inappropriate behavior. I was shocked when she confessed that since we fell in love, she'd often worried that I would realize I was married to someone with whom I was unhappy and who might not meet my standards. It was a long road back. We attended counseling together, and Jimmy went to therapy on her own. In the end, I could understand how it could have happened given her mindset and falling into the hands of manipulative individuals, but I still thought her love for me and common sense should have prevailed. The theater guild nearly collapsed. There were no more performances that season. The last 3 plays were canceled. Cynthia got divorced in a very ugly situation, and Philip was named in a lawsuit for alienation of affection. He didn't have much of a defense, and Cynthia's ex-husband pressured him to testify, which led to a messy revelation of Philip's and Cynthia's activities. Philip's wife, deeply embarrassed and fed up with his infidelity, also divorced him. Philip had the nerve to ask for support despite being unemployed, but the judge dismissed his claim, stating the job market was favorable for someone with his experience. Almost a year later, Celeste and the new board of directors from the old theater guild visited me. If Celeste hadn't personally asked, I would have refused. I wasn't one to hold grudges, but there were many promises made about oversight of both material and personnel. They nearly begged me to accept a seat on the board. Celeste's appeal convinced me, so I agreed and helped prepare for a new season, one focused on children's plays. I even participated in one, playing a role in a juvenile version of Into the Woods, which the local critic praised. During this period, Celeste became the artistic director, carefully choosing and directing productions, which made her happy. She tried for a few months to reconcile with Jack, but eventually divorced him. He did not take it well, and had to be threatened with a restraining order. Celeste and I were together frequently due to business, and Jimmy and I did our best to support her. I insisted Jimmy spend more time with me, and she often accompanied me on business trips, especially when they involved Celeste. Celeste signed on with the Food Network for a 13-episode series visiting restaurants in the Southeast. One episode took her to California and another to Vancouver. We didn't go to California, but turned the trip to Canada into a vacation. Celeste was dating a senior producer from the production team, and the four of us had a great time. Jimmy traveled with Celeste as her ad executive, and she managed her career excellently. Home and Garden approached us about the other show we pitched, and we worked out a deal where she would do 10 shows a year for them and 20 for the Food Network, leaving her about 10 weeks a year for vacations and personal appearances. The remaining weeks would be her time for relaxation. There were even discussions about writing a book or two as companion pieces. The production company was thriving. The team finished an animated short they had been working on for a couple of years, which was nominated for an Oscar. While it didn't win, it brought them significant recognition and job offers. Feeling I had done all I could for them, I started looking for new projects. A few months later, Jimmy approached me, looking nervous. "Can I ask you something?" she began. "No, you may not," I replied, which startled her. "Well, it was a stupid question, so I thought I'd give a silly answer," she said. "What's on your mind? Please hear me out before you say anything." "I'd like to act in amateur productions again, but not in our town. Jensenville is starting a theater guild, and I'd like to be part of it." Jensenville was a small town about 15 miles away with fewer than 5,000 residents. I considered it for a moment and said, "I'm not too keen on that idea." "Please, honey, they only plan on staging 3 plays this year. They're desperate for anyone with experience. You could join too. You don't seem too busy right now. It could be fun for both of us." "Do they know about the last production you were in?" I asked. She blushed slightly and answered, "No, and I'd rather it not come up in conversation." "Please, Roy, I miss it. I miss the peace of mind I used to have." I didn't say it out loud. I replied, "Let me meet them, and we'll go from there." She expressed her gratitude several times that night. The next morning, we did a meet and greet with the group. They seemed nervous and inexperienced. Their leader was a local high school English teacher and drama coach who had majored in drama, but had taken on the role out of necessity. He had some experience with off-Broadway productions and a summer tour with a road company performing Oklahoma. He said, "It's kind of a pipe dream for me. I used to live in a larger town and was deeply involved with the theater guild there. My old friends encouraged me to start this, and they even offered us some of their old sets. My students are eager, and a few of us have a drama background, but the rest are just locals who don't know what they're getting into. Some will quit when they see how much time it requires. Others will leave because it's not what they expected. The rest of us will just carry on." I appreciated his honesty, and that they seemed to be generally moral people, avoiding anything risk. When I asked if they had ever done a production involving sensitive topics, Bob, the teacher, looked disgusted and said they hadn't. He assured me that they wouldn't include any controversial material, which was important for a small-town audience. Jimmy immersed herself in the group, dragging me along when I wasn't busy. They were all nervous about their first production, with Jimmy listed as assistant director. The audience was small for the first show, and they seemed disappointed. I promised them things would improve. Their next production was the juvenile version of Into the Woods. Jimmy praised my performance as a cow, and I was drafted into the role. The lead, a 16-year-old girl, stole the show with her exceptional talent. The place was packed because one of the corporate sponsors, McCoy and Investing Incorporated, bought all the tickets and distributed them to the community. The applause lasted for 15 minutes, and I made sure every woman involved, including those behind the scenes, received a bouquet of roses. During the after-show mingling, I wore the cow head, and a little girl ran up, giggling as I moved back at her. Since Jimmy was involved in the production, I invited Celeste, who was home from filming. She was accompanied by a network executive who was making fun of the production until Celeste gave him a stern warning. The after-party was held at an ice cream parlor to accommodate the kids in the production. The local paper highlighted the event, leading to an extended run for the play. I'm not always lucky. I'll take my chances based on your track record. I'd really like to do this, but I won't go forward on my own. In the end, we formed an LLC, JR Enterprises, and bought the place. Getting the bar remodeled and off the ground was more labor-intensive than we thought, and for a while, we were there once or twice a week. It was too far away to commute, so we always spent the night. I asked Jimmy if she would be jealous because I spent so much time with Jody. She was getting dressed for work and was still in her underwear. I said, "Before you start playing the field, you better think about the grand slam you have at home." By then, she was taking her clothes off and ended up being late for work. Weeks later, as we were almost done, the grand reopening would be held in 2 weeks. We kept a small part of the club open so our patrons wouldn't forget us. Most of the regulars showed up every Thursday for an update tour. I got lucky when we found out Desiree was an interior designer in real life and hired her as a consultant. I mentioned this to Jody, and she just chuckled, saying, "You're the type of guy who could fall into a barrel of challenges and come up with solutions in both hands and one in your mouth." That was an analogy I would never have thought of. Jimmy and I were having a hard time getting quality time together. If I wasn't tied up, she was with the theater group. The new season was coming up, and she was deeply involved in helping them decide which plays to do. Jimmy wanted to do Rocky Horror, but it got shot down pretty quickly because of the conservative nature of the community. Celeste had a limited presence in the old group because she was off filming her next set of shows for Home and Garden. They were on a tight schedule, trying to get all 10 shows in within 5 weeks. The club finally opened to a packed crowd. They were turning people away pretty early, giving those who couldn't get in a gold pass that ensured they would be the first in line the next time they came. The pass came with a complimentary first drink. We had hired Tina, the Latina trans woman I had met the first night, to be the manager. It turned out she had a degree in hospitality management, but had a hard time finding a position in her field. I insisted on a security team. 5 men and 3 women, all trained in their fields. 2 worked the club, 2 patrolled the parking lot, and 1 monitored everything on cameras in their office. All were wired and could converge in moments in case of an incident. Tina thought it was a bit of overkill until I pointed out how vulnerable people with alternate lifestyles could be. When 2 of the bouncers turned away 2 carloads of men intent on making an example of someone, she never said another word. The club was also on good terms with local law enforcement. 2 of the security team were retired policemen, and there was always a pot of coffee and snacks in the office, usually homemade by one of the customers. As time passed and the incident rate of calls all but disappeared, everyone relaxed. Jody and I made it a point to visit every month to address any concerns and look after our investments. The last time we visited, they were having a drag queen contest. Amy told me they were fielding a softball team in the mixed leagues. She laughed, saying, "Gays, lesbians, and trans, we've got all the bases covered." They went on to win the championship that year, and the trophy resides in a display case near the front door with a team picture over it. Owners from other towns often visited and came away with new ideas, sometimes even leaving a few. I stopped at my accountant's for a yearly review. I was worth roughly $4 million, but it was mostly invested in different ventures. They estimated my worth would double in 4 years and triple in 10. I thought about it for a few days and decided to take some time off. My thinking was that now would be an excellent time to start a family. Jimmy surprised me in a couple of ways. She was not as happy as I thought she would be that I would be home full-time for a while, and didn't seem too keen on starting a family. She was 34, and I was 38, and I could see our window closing. My world started unraveling a month later when I attended a performance and saw a familiar face in the crowd. It looked a lot like Jack, but the guy disappeared before I could get close. Then I saw another familiar face in the playbill, Philip. His bio said he was a local businessman and former professional actor who enjoyed participating in theatrics. My stomach was rolling when I joined Jimmy in their post-production mingle. She read my mood, stayed quiet, and never moved unless I did. It wasn't until we were on the way home that I brought it up. "So, when were you going to tell me Philip had joined your troupe? He hasn't been with us long, honey, and he and I never cross paths. If I find out he's in a production, I skip it and work on the next one. I need to remind you that nothing actually happened years ago, and nothing will happen now. I need to remind you that nothing actually happened years ago, and nothing will happen now. I didn't tell you because I knew it would upset you. You know, I think I saw Jack in the audience. You may have. He and Philip moved in together to save money after their divorces and seemed to enjoy living together, considering their similar lifestyles. I had only spoken to him once and told him to keep his distance, assuring him that we'd get along fine. Please don't worry. I'm a big girl and can handle myself. I make sure I'm never alone with either one of them. Too many bad memories," she said convincingly. Even though we had some of the best intimacy we'd had in a while, I couldn't get them off my mind. She started spending more time at work. I asked Bob and Jen, and they both said the firm was right in the middle of pitching a client with nationwide implications, so everyone was doing all they could to be successful. I noticed she never left her phone lying around, and seemed to guard it like it was gold. Adding this to the inordinate amount of time she was spending getting ready for the new play gave me an uneasy feeling. I stopped by the investigative agency and talked to the major, his rank from the Army, and since many employees were veterans, the title stuck. "Are you sure you want to go down this road? Everything you've told me seems to have a reasonable explanation. If it's just paranoia on your part, and she finds out, she's not going to be a very happy wife." After some soul-searching, I decided to proceed. "Major, look into it, if you have time." "All right. The easiest way would be to hack her phone. If you can get it to me, we'll probably subcontract most of this because she knows me and a lot of the staff from your parties. Remember, she interviewed most of us when they did that murder mystery. Do you have a time frame? A week or 2 should do it. You don't know how much I hope you tell me I told you so," he said with a sigh. "I'll start tomorrow. When can I get access to her phone?" I had to think about it. The only time it wasn't on her person was when she was charging it. "Can you send someone around after midnight?" "Tomorrow night is fine. He can do it from his van. It'll be a lot quicker that way." Feeling like a jerk, I made sure we had a pretty spirited session that night. She snuggled up to me afterward and fell asleep instantly. I waited an hour until she turned over, slipped out of bed, eased her phone off the charger, and went out the patio door. It kind of freaked me out when I saw him sitting there in the shadows. He didn't even go back to the van, hooking the phone up to his laptop and working on the patio table. Almost immediately, he said softly, "She's got an anti-hack encryption installed, pretty sophisticated stuff. Can you get me her laptop?" I found myself creeping back into the house to retrieve it. He took it to the van, hooked up a couple of cables, and worked furiously before sitting back and sighing. "Got it." I caught it, and reprogrammed it so it will never show up. I need your phone. I caught it and reprogrammed it so it will never show up. I need your phone. I handed it to him, and he did a few things before returning it to me. You've got a tracker app and a remote viewing program. What does that mean exactly? It means you need another phone. Someone has cloned yours, and everything you text, everything you say, every business transaction you make over your phone is reported to someone else. Damn, this could be really bad. I run most of my businesses over the phone. Don't touch yours, and keep anything confidential to a minimum. Use it just enough to not get caught. I'll have you one up and running at the office tomorrow afternoon that will be as bulletproof as I can make it. By then, I should be able to tell who's getting your information. What do I do now? He shrugged. Put everything back like you got it, and go back to bed. Try to get some sleep if you can. Don't vary your routine. If she wants to cuddle, cuddle. If she wants to play, play. If she ignores you, don't get antagonistic. Just roll with it. Remember, we don't know what we're dealing with here. She might be into something shady but still be faithful to you. We need to find the players and figure out what the game is. If it can't be done tomorrow, it will be by the next day. Don't call us. We'll call you. You're still part owner, and it won't be unusual for us to say we need you to come down to look at some spreadsheets and brainstorm about branching out. Surprisingly, I slept like a baby. I didn't succeed in business by hesitating. If I found a problem in something I was investing in, I faced it head-on. I was deeply saddened to think that the most important investment in my life was about to be proven worthless. They called 2 days later. Jimmy heard me answer the phone and asked what I was talking about. The major wants me to come by and talk about branching out. She smirked. Let me guess, he's found a new way of peeking in windows to get the goods. I grinned and watched her squirm at my reply. Nobody does that much anymore unless the client wants live pictures. Pretty much everything now is done by computer and social media. Most agencies worth their salt have 1 or 2 tech experts who can overcome security codes and get past firewalls with ease. The major doesn't need help in that area. He wants me to consider letting him add a personal security division, bodyguards, escorts, extra club security when high-profile guests are present, that sort of thing. It could be very profitable. They've got their pitch together and want to present it. Knowing Jason, there will probably be a PowerPoint presentation. Want to come with me? She wrinkled her nose. No, it sounds boring as hell. Besides, I have a guild meeting and might be late. I surprised her with my response. Aren't you always lately? I won't wait up. I was out the door before she could say more. The major met me at the door, not smiling. Jason had his headphones on, and when he looked up and saw me, he handed me a piece of paper. The first thing I heard was Jimmy saying, "No fun and games tonight, boys. Roy is a little ticked about the time I'm spending here. I can only justify so much." A male voice, later identified as Jack, started whining. Damn it, I was looking for a little fun tonight. I still remembered Philip's voice as he spoke calmly. Calm down, Jack. We can wait. We're almost in. When we get there, we all disappear to the Cayman for a very enjoyable life. Jimmy giggled. At least you two can console each other. I'm also feeling frisky and intend to keep Roy calm and relaxed. Besides, he's a pretty good partner, and I need to make the most of it. Jack wanted to whine, but Jimmy cut him off. Get over yourself, Jack. Go home and be with Philip. Philip laughed. He was so worked up knowing we were going to see you today. He did that before the play. Come on, honey, give Jimmy a kiss, and when we get home, I'll make sure to satisfy you. Jimmy giggled. You lucky boy. He used it on me the other night, and it was almost more than I could handle. You might be walking funny tomorrow. Jason switched off the headphones. I cloned her phone and have total access. Every time she speaks live or on the phone, it's recorded. She talks a lot. I had to put a filter on it so it only activates after certain keywords, but she revealed some of their plans, so I had to remove it. Now we have to listen to every word. My ears are sore. I'll let the major take over. The major didn't sugarcoat it. She's involved with both those men and at least one more guy and 2 women. We have names and bios on all of them, but need to identify the last male partner. We'll have that by tomorrow. I was shocked. Why? I asked. I thought she loved me. She does, I think. She still does, but from what I heard, she doesn't want to ruin you. However, she does want all your ready cash, including the prenup trust fund you established. There was $300,000 in it, plus about $40,000 in her checking account. My investment capital is a little over $600,000, so if she got it all, it would come up just shy of $1 million. $1 million is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme, it won't last her a lifetime. It seems you've rubbed off on her. She wants to invest the money in a donut franchise. She intercepted a call from the owner wanting you to invest and checked him out. She even wanted to see him in her capacity as an ad executive and your wife. She and her partners think the place could be a gold mine. She's throwing our life away for donuts. Really? Jason rejoined the conversation. Her partner seemed to have convinced her that you're having affairs with Celeste Richards, Jod Hathaway, and Amy Rogers. They even say you all are involved together. I sighed. Damn, I'm a busy guy. I've never been with Celeste, and I haven't talked to her except on the phone in 5 weeks. Jad is only into women and has no interest in men sexually, and Amy's a transvestite and the accountant for the club I invested in. And before you ask, I don't swing that way. What do I do now? The major smiled a smile that probably struck terror into anyone he was interrogating. Now we get irrefutable truth. The conversations we've obtained are illegal and can never be used in court. However, we can use them to track their movements and be there when they meet. Then we get pictures and audio, and your prenup will be upheld. It shouldn't take us long. You need to go on a trip for a couple of days soon. We also need to wire your house with audio and video recorders. I don't think they're dumb enough to do it in your house, but you never know. Tomorrow is Thursday. You can do it while she's at work. I'll tell her tonight that I have to be out of town Friday and may not return until Sunday. She already has the motive. This will just give her the opportunity. I went home, wondering what else I could do. Luckily, I had time to take a sleep aid I used occasionally when traveling, and was almost out of it when she got home. Jimmy slid into bed and rubbed up against me, but quickly gave up when I didn't respond. I lay there wondering how many more nights we would sleep together as husband and wife. I told her I'd be leaving around noon to travel to Cleveland. What the hell is in Cleveland? She asked. A security service that's going out of business due to poor management. The major is going with me to evaluate the personnel. We should get through the interviews by tomorrow, but it might take until Sunday. There was a hint of resentment in her voice. And you're only telling me this now? I shrugged. I didn't know about it until last night. It came up in the meeting we had. It could be quite lucrative, and it's just for 2 days. I tell you what, let's plan a vacation for the week after next, somewhere warm, sandy, and private. I've heard the Caymans are nice this time of year, and we've never been there. I have a feeling we're drifting apart lately, and I want you to know how much I love you. She flinched at the mention of the Caymans, but recovered quickly. Jimmy either had developed far more as an actress than I realized, or was genuinely moved. There were tears in her eyes when she kissed me. I'd love that, honey. Let's plan to go there and unwind. Maybe we can get the same bungalow and just forget about the world for a few days. Looking her in the eyes, knowing it was unlikely to happen, and lying about it was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. After she left, I packed for Cleveland. The major and Jim met me at the airport. He had already planned on going, pending my agreement, so I was really going to Cleveland. We arrived and got the business part done early, putting 3 men and a woman on contract for a year. They didn't even have to move if they liked Cleveland. We could email them details, and they would show up at the appointed time and place. When we got to the hotel, Jim said, "Put your phone in the hotel room. You're not staying, but your phone will make it look like you are. One of the new operatives will come by around 7 o'clock. Take it with him while he dines at a nice restaurant courtesy of us, and then he'll walk around downtown for an hour before returning it to your room. If she calls, it will automatically forward to your new phone, and she'll never know." I shuddered, glad he was on my side. We ended up at a very nice resort in the country. When we went down to dine, I was surprised to find Celeste, Jad, Bob, Jan from the ad agency, Rick from the production company, and Chef G. Pretty much everyone I was in business with was at the table. I looked at the major. "We're all tied to you through business, but more importantly, through friendship. This is a show of solidarity. Roy, you invest in more than businesses. Your strength lies in investing in people. We're all with you, whatever you decide to do." I was overcome. Until I went into business, I had been a pretty private person without many friends. Looking around the table, I realized that even if our ties were primarily business, they were there as friends. Celeste had one hand locked onto mine, and Jod had the other. After a few minutes, Jod cleared her throat. "What do you need us to do?" "Well, I'd appreciate some shoulders to cry on later. As for the rest, Jim has it covered." They all looked at him. "They're planning a big after-play party tomorrow," Jim said. "According to the chatter, they don't know it, but there will be a slightly larger number in the audience than normal. We'll mingle with the patrons at the post-production event. Anything they say there can be used because it's a public place and there's no right to privacy. We already know where they're going and have that covered. We can't legally put anything in the suite they'll be using, but there are many listening devices out there that can record through walls. Plus, if a curtain malfunctions and doesn't close all the way, and someone happens to be in a position to see through it, then it's perfectly legal to look and film through the window. The whole group will be filmed continuously from the start of the play until the end of their evening. There's no doubt we'll have enough for you to divorce for cause and uphold the prenup." He sighed. "There's going to be collateral damage. The other man and both women are married, not to any of the players. Tell us, Roy, how bad do you want it to be? Do you want her to go away quietly, or do you want to expose her and her friends completely? Either way works for me. Oh, and I booked an appointment with what I consider the best divorce lawyer in the state, Monday morning at 10 o'clock. She emailed me a list of things you'll need to bring, most importantly, the prenup." I had to think about it. Most of my friends didn't know about the prenup because they never had cause to see it, but when I'm wronged, I can turn into a vengeful force. One of my first investments folded because my partner misused the money and bankrupted the business. I recovered and tracked him for a while, making sure every time he was about to get something good, something would set him back further. I did it for 4 years before I felt I had my pound of flesh. As I was still thinking, Jod piped up, "Don't waffle, Roy. Be as decisive as you always have been. Put an end to it and get on with your life," Jim advised. "That's right, you don't have to be nice, just get yourself free." His statement broke the tension, and everyone grinned. The drinking began, and I went to bed while they were singing loudly. Some even got the words right. The next morning, I was a bit hungover when the phone rang. My new ringtone, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, made me grin. Jason's doing, no doubt. "Hello," I answered. "Good morning, honey. How's Cleveland?" "It's actually a lot better than I thought. It's clean with lots of parks and greenways, and the people are friendly. Still, it's Cleveland. I'll be glad to get home. I'll be glad when you're home too, honey. The good news is I got an early flight. I'll probably be home by 8. That put a kink in her plans. She'd have to cut her funds short. I hoped she'd at least shower before I got home. She faltered a bit but recovered. That's great. Remember, my play is tonight. I might be a little grumpy in the morning. The play started at 8 o'clock and would be over before 10 o'clock. Factoring in the mingle, she could be home by 11:30 easily. I couldn't resist a little jab. Well, don't get carried away. I know how excited you get after a performance. I promised to be a good girl. I should be in bed by midnight. Yes, but with who? I thought as I disconnected. Jim came in, grinning. Got her. She wasn't alone last night. While she was talking to you, she was in bed with a woman and the missing man from the group. You're kidding. He's one of the board members, a married one. The woman is married to a DA in another county. Depending on how you want to play this, it could get very sticky very fast. I decided on the spot to pull the trigger right after the play. How much would it cost to get that lawyer to draw up divorce papers for adultery and get alienation of affections actions for all the players? I know they won't be legal, but they will declare intent. Jim looked startled. Jesus, once you make a decision, you don't mess around. It'll cost you, but I can get it done. I'll move on it while I tell the group my plans. I called Celeste and Jod and met them for breakfast. Jod seemed a bit shocked, but Celeste just smiled. Poor Jimmy, all this time, and she still doesn't know who she was married to. This will destroy all of them, and probably the guilt. I doubt they can recover from a second scandal. After this, I'll help them get started up again. But I'll make sure they know it's the last time. Most of us flew home together, and by the time we landed, they had their own plan. All were going to be there for moral support. Jim was bringing in a few of the new bodyguards to keep it as civil as possible. I hung out at the agency, listening to the phone chatter. Jimmy seemed to have last-minute doubts. I think I'll skip tonight. Roy's coming home early, and I can't afford to raise his suspicions. That led to a flurry of calls among the conspirators. Most wanted her to come, while the DA's wife urged her not to. You're showing good sense, girl. No need to mess up our plans. We'll have plenty of time later. Then she giggled. Besides, it'll be more for me and Janice. Break a leg tonight. None of the group knew her plans except Philip and Jack. Still going to burn them all. You play, you pay. Jason stopped by, grinning. Found your friend Philip. It seems he has a degree in computer science and works for an IT company. When it comes out what he did, he'll probably be unemployed. Want to have some fun? Jason spent an hour cross-hacking all of Philip's accounts. He even put up a post on Philip's Facebook page, carefully editing out any reference to Jimmy, declaring his love for Jack and their eternal bond. It also turned out Philip wasn't as skilled as he thought. Jason followed his electronic trail and recovered every dime they had taken. I'd love to see his face when this hits, Jason said. I just smiled. Come to the play. You can watch his face when I tell them I got all my money back. Showtime in more ways than one, I thought as I sat in the van that night. We were waiting until the last minute to enter, waiting for the lights to go down and the curtain to rise. I was a bit surprised by my date for the night. It was the ex-wife of Philip. I didn't recognize her at first. She had lost about 50 pounds, and her hair was now blonde, flowing halfway down her back. It turned out that while she was married to Philip, she had been at the end of her career as an MMA fighter. Her fighting name was Catherine the Great due to her size. Although she never became a champion, she made a good bit of money before she retired. Unfortunately, Philip siphoned off much of it before she discovered it. After the confrontation, she decided if he could cheat in marriage, maybe it would be a good idea to see if he was up to anything else. She caught him just in time to claim a little over half of her assets. It was the main reason she didn't have to pay him alimony. It seems he had taken his share of the assets early. She was a stunningly attractive woman, far more striking than I remembered. Back then, I had only seen her briefly. As we talked, I learned she held 3 black belts in different styles and was proficient in 2 more. She had a degree in criminal justice and had worked as a cop until she grew tired of the politics and harassment. She had since freelanced as a bodyguard and was happy to work for Jim, even expressing interest in a permanent position. It occurred to me as we spoke that all my investments and the friends I had made over the years were unintentionally geared toward this situation. It wasn't something I had planned, but it seemed my luck had played a part as Jod had cracked about it. 5 minutes after the curtain opened, I got out of the van and caught a glimpse of her 4-inch heels. "How can you fight wearing those?" I asked. She grinned. "I don't wear anything with a strap. These are slip-ons, and I can be out of them in a second. Sometimes, if I'm not in a hurry, I leave them on." You'd be amazed at how effective a 4-inch heel can be in certain situations. Her heels made her tower over me by a good 3 inches, but I didn't mind. I doubted anyone would notice me beside her. She laughed. "I'm usually dressed in business attire. It feels good to glam up now and then." I hardly approved of her outfit, but her little black dress was quite striking, high on the thigh and low on the cleavage. It definitely got the vote of everyone who noticed us slip into our balcony seats. The play was a scaled-down version of My Fair Lady. I watched Jimmy on stage. She seemed to glow, and it hurt to see her so happy. I wondered what her expression would be like in about 90 minutes. Jack and Philip were the male leads and absorbed the applause. The curtain calls lasted 15 minutes, and they disappeared backstage before going out to the lobby to receive their fans' accolades. I had 2 off-duty cops present to ensure nothing got out of hand, and 3 bodyguards acted as process servers, each carrying a dozen red roses. When Jimmy saw me, she seemed genuinely pleased. When I didn't approach, she frowned and tried to make her way to me. One of the process servers stopped her, saying, "The roses are from an admirer." Jimmy's name was confirmed, and she was handed a large manila envelope. The process server took a photo of her holding it and said, "You've been served. Good night." Jimmy stood for a moment, trying to process what was happening, glancing over at me before opening the package. Inside were several pictures from the night before. The top photo showed her in a compromising position with the DA's wife, while Philip was involved in the scene as well. Jimmy didn't say anything. She looked at me for a second before her eyes rolled up, and she fainted. Some of the photos scattered, and friends trying to help her got an eyeful. Jack looked like he was about to faint when he saw his own photo, one of him with Janice in a compromising position. The DA's wife, whose name I can't recall, was rocked back and forth, repeating "no, no, no" over and over. Janice screamed and ran from the building. Philip's reaction was the most interesting. Along with the lawsuit papers, there was a note detailing a package for the DA, outlining all his illegal activities. He dropped the envelope and looked around wildly before settling on me. "I'm going to kill you," he charged full speed, only to be met by and heeled to his groin. It looked every bit as painful as she said. He fell to the ground, whimpering and holding his groin, reached down, grabbed a handful of his hair, and dragged him half upright. She grinned in his face. "Hi, honey. Missed me?" Then she gave him an elbow strike to the face. It was a bit overboard, but our lawyer argued it was just the adrenaline of the moment, and she thought he made a threatening move towards her client. The cops and EMTs arrived, and it was a déjà vu moment, though this was to be the last time. On the advice of my lawyer, I made myself unavailable for a few days, long enough for the real papers to be served. I never returned to the house I had bought for Jimmy. I no longer wanted it. In the end, I gave her $50,000, the exact amount I had added to the Infidelity fund while we were married. I also gave her the house and covered the last 10 years of payments. I kept the car as it was a gift for her birthday the year before. All told, she netted about $175,000 in assets, a substantial amount, but it still didn't compare to what she had lost. I struggled to understand why she tried to rob the bank when she already had the combination to the safe. All she had to do was remain faithful. Of course, she tried to spin it, but I wasn't buying it. In one of our few conversations, I asked why she had swallowed every lie and never checked to see if any of it was true. She had the money to hire a private investigator, or, God forbid, talk to me. She had no definitive answer. A week before the divorce, She gave up and signed the papers. They did keep her on at the agency, but the warm working relationship was gone, and it was evident she would never rise higher than she was at the time. It was no surprise when she resigned and took a position out of town. My friends and business associates stayed close, especially Celeste and Jody. It was no surprise when she resigned and took a position out of town. My friends and business associates stayed close, especially Celeste and Jody. After 6 months, they decided I was going to be all right and left me to my own devices. I still woke up reaching across the bed for Jimmy. It takes a long time for years of love to fade away. The whole episode made me a little nervous, so I eased off on investing for a while, consolidating cash flow. It put me in a better position should something lucrative come along. I did make one more investment before I scaled back. The guy who had reached out about the donut franchise called to see if any progress was being made. He seemed devastated when I gave him an abridged version of what had happened. His response was to ship 8 different flavors of his donuts, 3 dozen of each, to my office. They were piled in front of the door when I arrived. I gathered as many people as I could for a taste test, and they all agreed they were the best they had ever tasted. Even Jody, health conscious as she was, tried to sneak a dozen out as she left. My favorite was a molasses donut, which seemed to have instant artery hardening capabilities and contained at least 2 million calories, but I couldn't stop eating them. The guy was from Louisiana, so I flew down to look over his operation. He had one shop in a small town, and it took me 40 minutes to get in the door because of the customers. I got a donut and a surprisingly good cup of coffee, another Louisiana product, heavily blended with chicory. When things eased up, I introduced myself. The counter manager turned out to be his daughter, who called out, "Pops, the money man is here." The owner bustled from the back, soaked in sweat, wearing a collapsed paper hat. He was about 53, a Cajun from a small parish no one had heard of. His speech was hard to follow, but he beamed with enthusiasm and was impossible not to like. I tried to talk business, but he stopped me. "I make the donuts. My daughter handles the business end. She thinks we could go statewide, maybe 4 or 5 more shops. You should talk to her. If she says okay, we do business. I've got to get back to work." I set up an appointment for 6 o'clock that night, snagged another molasses donut, and left. The appointment turned out to be at her home. She fed me an authentic Cajun dinner, most of the dishes really good if exceptionally spicy. Her husband was there, home from a job on an oil rig. She had 3 children, ages 3 to 13, all girls. After the dishes were cleared, and we all had cups of the coffee I was getting addicted to, we hashed things out. The first thing I wanted to know was how he came up with the recipes and what made them taste so much better. Pops makes his own flavorings from vanilla on up. He makes most of it in 50-gallon food-grade drums, and they have to sit at least a year. If we go into business together, we'll have to find somewhere to produce in volume. That could be a problem with the startup. We have enough to run 3 stores for a year, besides ours right now. When I mentioned 3 stores for a test market, she nearly fainted. "You have no idea how original your donuts taste. My vision is to have one in every city in the state with a population of over 20,000. I thought we'd branch out to Texas, Alabama, and Georgia until we cover the South. I figure in 10 years, we could be nationwide, maybe even international in select markets." How does that sound? It sounds like too much. I don't know if my dad will go for that. We can talk to him and see. It took about a month to convince him to go with my proposal. Since I was shouldering the financial burden, I got the lion's share of the profits. He finally agreed when I told him I'd put a buyout clause in the contract, 5% a year until he owned it entirely. The startup deal was 70/30ths, and I exempted his original shop, so he retained sole ownership of that one. Then it was a struggle to get him to focus on making enough flavorings to support the stores. I had to bring in experts to explain how it worked, and that we needed to legally protect the recipes to thwart imitators. I included a clause in the contract that stated we might consider bottling and selling the flavors as a secondary business in the future. 8 months after we signed the contract, we opened a shop in New Orleans. When the locals discovered how good the donuts were, they tried to keep it a secret, but the ad agency made sure it got out. Soon, we were so swamped we had to add a second location just to make donuts. We then opened shops in Shreveport and Baton Rouge. Word had spread, especially when a Food Network show featured them. Celeste did a disclaimer at the start of the show, saying she was a personal friend, and although I owned the majority of the stock, I had little to do with the making of the donuts. Gaston was thrilled and couldn't believe his little enterprise was on TV. We had the flavor factory running 3 shifts, barely keeping up with demand. Gaston insisted that the flavors age for at least 6 months, and if they didn't pass his personal test, they had to remain in barrels. After we got established, I hired a well-respected CEO and made Gaston's daughter his second in command. He came out of retirement to train her and planned to return to retirement with a significantly larger retirement fund once he felt comfortable with her progress. I took some time off to relax. I kept up with my exercise regimen to avoid any issues. I took trips to remote places, enjoying nature, and even considered building a vacation home in one of those areas. I continued to check on everything I invested in, attended meetings, but everything was running smoothly, so I didn't worry too much. I was checking on the bar where Amy, Desiree, and Tina wanted a meeting. Amy laid it out for me. This place is a gold mine for you. We think it's time for you to branch out. Other towns could benefit from what we've achieved here. Our community is crying out for places like this, places where we can feel safe. We found a good spot. It's in a low-crime, progressive area, so we think it will be accepted with minimal protest. Would you consider it? Jody decided she didn't want to participate except as a limited investor. I wasn't really interested either, so I laid it out for them. I'll invest 30%. Jody is good for another 20%. The rest you'll have to raise on your own. We can't raise that kind of money. Yes, you can. I'll loan it to you. I'll keep the payments low, and the interest rate will be prime plus 1%. You can call on me if you need help, but this will be your business. After the tears and hugs subsided, I pulled the papers out of my case and gave them to Amy. Look them over, then get a lawyer to do a follow-up, sign them, and you're in business. The buyout clause was set at 5% a year until they owned it all. I started dating Celeste. The courtship lasted 4 months. I wasn't doing much of anything at the time but watching the money roll in. She was still filming her shows and doing a tour to support her book. I tagged along a few times and found that when Celeste worked, she worked hard, spending 5 hours signing books and posing for pictures, refusing to leave until the last book was closed and everyone was satisfied. She introduced me a couple of times as her partner. I knew she meant business partner, at least I think she did, but everyone assumed we were life partners. The little public displays of affection may have altered their perceptions. We were intimate often, exploring many things, mostly her ideas. We had a lot of discussions about our pasts. Hers was much more colorful than mine. We spent about an hour talking about her past experiences, which she shared openly. Over time, I started to enjoy our conversations more. Despite this, I knew that letting another person into our lives could complicate things. I believe in my heart it was because we gave up the intimacy and commitment of a dedicated couple. It ended up being more about physical connections. Sometimes those connections were enjoyable, but when we were done, we were done. Rarely did anyone want to linger or cuddle afterward. Jack was usually so drained, he was asleep within minutes. It sounds like fun and games, but it can be a lonely life. She took another deep breath. All that being said, the past is the past. My relationships after Jack were always monogamous. She snuggled closer. I won't promise you this. I will guarantee it. If we end up together permanently, it will be just that, together, permanently. No others until death do us part. And I mean it. I was still on the fence. I was pretty sure I'd always had feelings for Celeste, but her past intimidated me a little. Sometimes I wondered if she was thinking of past relationships when we were together. I never had that issue. When I was with someone, I was completely focused on the present. I did my best to meet my partner's needs. My hesitation was starting to strain our relationship. She had dropped hints the last time we were together, and I hadn't responded as well as I could have. She left suddenly, and I didn't see her for 2 weeks. I had bought a few acres at the lake I liked so much. I couldn't get lake access for a property, but I did secure lake access. I had a powerboat I rarely used, preferring to go out early in the morning in my kayak. I enjoyed a good paddle and made sure to be off the lake before the big boats made it too choppy. My house was a 4-bedroom ranch style with many amenities, including a nice patio with a gas grill, charcoal grill, fire pit, and a clay oven. It was off the beaten path, but I had converted one of the bedrooms into an office, and with the internet, I could handle most of my business from home. I was about to get into the hot tub when I saw Celeste at the door. My heart jumped a little. It didn't take long for us to reconnect. I woke up the next day feeling sore from our activities. We had explored many ways to be together. I woke with Celeste's head on my chest and her body pressed against mine. I looked down and grinned. I walked over to my wall safe, keyed in the combination, and pulled out a little box. I opened it and called out, "Celeste, honey, wake up." She groaned and opened one eye. I hoped the ring looked impressive close to her face. "I've reached a decision, honey. If you'll have me, I'd like." She was on me so quickly that we ended up in a tangle of covers on the floor. Celeste took pictures with her phone and posted the decent ones immediately. Within 30 minutes, our phones were lighting up. I was going through the wedding cards and found one with no name on it. "I always knew you and Celeste would end up together. It is my hope she makes you happy. Best wishes, Jimmy." Jimmy had disappeared for a while after leaving the agency. When she reappeared, she was with a new partner. They were swingers, which lasted about 6 months. She vanished again, and when she returned, she started her own agency. Her old bosses would farm out small jobs to her, and she brought them in to help on larger projects. She married a man she met while working on his campaign. After a year of dating, they married and now have a little girl. Jack disappeared after being served for alienation of affection. She could find out where he is if she wanted, but she had no reason to. Philip fared the worst. I didn't press charges, as I would have had to charge Jimmy too. She was never the mastermind, just a capable but insecure woman. They managed to get about $20,000, and I got it all back. I sent a detailed account to his bosses, who fired him instantly and made the reason for his termination known. No reputable firm would touch him. He went dark web for a while, seizing unprotected computers and ransoming them. He eventually hacked a major business, and the owners used all their resources to find him. When they did, they turned him over to the authorities. He received 7 years and was a month from parole when he got into an altercation with another inmate. He ended up having to serve his full sentence plus an additional 18 months. I wondered occasionally how he was faring in prison with his slight form and pretty face. I bet he adapted to whatever role he was assigned. Celeste saw me with the card and asked who it was from. I tossed it into the trash. "An old business associate." "You're grinning. What's up?" "I'm 10 days late. I'll be getting one of those home kits tomorrow." "Well then, good for us." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.